Okay, so we're getting close to having a new GM for the Vikings. Reports are they've narrowed it down to two guys um, out of the like eight or so that they interviewed over the last couple weeks here. Uh, Candidate number one, suitor number one, uh, Kwesi Adolfo Mensa. I think I got that right. Um, from the Browns. I think I forget their exact job title right now. I think it's like VP of Personnel or something like that. And then Ryan Poles, who's with the Chiefs right now, and he's um, I forget I forget what the titles are. When it gets to job titles that have like 10 words in them, it gets very complicated to remember, especially off the top of my head. I should take notes. So, and because those are the two that it's reported, they're going to get the second interview. And as we all know, anyone can get one interview. When they bring you back for the second interview, yeah, that's when they're really interested. Um, so unless something, unless some left field candidate, or maybe they rethink it on some other candidate, it's going to be one of those two. One of those two guys is going to be the new placement. And I'm not going to be outraged. I'm not one of these Vikings fans who's going to be outraged if they don't pick my guy. Um, but you know, if I had to pick one, I don't necessarily who I think it's going to be, but if I had to pick who I would want, I would go with Poles. I would go with the guy um, from the more successful franchise. And maybe that's unfair. I mean, the Browns have been more successful in the past few years than any point in about 25 years, but maybe that's unfair. But I want the guy who's been been with an organization, and I looked up. He's been with them since like the late 2000s, so he's been with them for a long time. He's been with them, and they've been pretty successful. Obviously, getting Mahomes send them to a whole other level, but they were pretty successful for a few years before then. They were fairly consistent playoff team, fairly consistent contender. I think they maybe won a couple playoff games when it was like the Alex Smith era. Um, and hell, he even goes back to when they had Matt Castle as their quarterback. But um, my thing is always like go find the organizations that are consistently successful. I'm not big on like the pop up for a year here and I'm interested in you know going to the organizations that are successful for a long period, and maybe don't always have that absolute top of the line quarterback. Obviously they have one now. They have Mahomes, but they haven't had Mahomes. They've only had Mahomes for like 4 or 5 years, but they were good before that. And it's impossible to know, what, you know, who gets credit for all the personnel moves. I guess Poles is more of a, um, um, more of like a scout. He was a scout, um, college scouting, so he's obviously involved more in the draft, stuff like that. Um, but they've Chiefs have been pretty successful with other roster moves and drafting, aside from just Mahomes. Um, and obviously we haven't we've had some rough patches here in the drafting in recent years. And not to discount the other guy, Browns guy. We'll just call him Browns guy. Um, I guess he's not as much of a player evaluator. It's more of an analytics thing for him, I guess, which you know obviously has been very big in baseball in recent years. Not sure so much in football, but he's got a little less of like a football background, which could be good or bad. I mean, you know, but again, I just you know he could be great. I mean, he could be a great GM someday for someone. Maybe he'll be a great GM for the Vikings. But you know, I think the Browns have been a lot of hype the last few years. Like they had the 2020 year where they were good. Won a playoff game, first time in like 25 years or whatever. But that's also been kind of bracketed by 2 years where they were arguably the biggest flop in the NFL. I mean, they were a big flop this year. They were a pretty big flop in 2019. They had a lot of hype going in. Now, it's not fair to say, oh, it's the fault of this guy who's not even the actual GM of the team. But again, I want the guys who are with the successful franchises, and the Browns have not been that yet. They've been more successful in the last couple of years, but they haven't really sustained anything like what the Chiefs have done. So for me, I'm all in on Poles. I don't know if that's going to be the guy. I think both of them have had other interviews. I think Poles interviewed with the Bears, and he's a top contender for the Bears. I would think if he, if it's strictly up to him, like deciding, like if both teams offer him the job, I would think, maybe I'm looking through purple colored glasses, but I think I would rather take the job with the Vikings. But he might have a different opinion. Of course, if he has a different opinion, then fuck him, we'll take the other guy. But yeah, I would go with Poles. I want the guy who's the Chiefs have been a very successful franchise even before getting Mahomes, for a lot of years now. They're both young. They're both younger than me, which is hard to wrap my head around. We might even have a head coach who's younger than me. That's hard. That's also hard to wrap my head around. But either way, I think you're gonna see differences with how personnel moves are made and how drafts are run. It's going to be interesting to see. We're not going to be able to predict what's all going to happen. People have already bringing up if they hire Poles, they're bringing up the Alex Smith to Kirk Cousins comparison, that they moved on from a a good but not like absolute top tier quarterback, and moved on to a rookie, and obviously not only didn't miss a beat, they went up and they won a Super Bowl. Like, I'm okay for doing that if they hire Poles and he identifies a college quarterback or even an existing quarterback somewhere who he thinks can be the very long term guy. Okay, like as much as I'm pro Kirk, like, you got to roll with whatever the decision is with the new front office, because they're the ones running the show. I ain't running the show. I would disagree with getting rid of Kirk unless you have a very good backup plan available. And if they do, I mean, hell, if we have our version of Alex Smith into Patrick Mahomes, and we get one of the best players in the NFL and win a Super Bowl and make deep trips into the playoffs or a regular thing, I'm all for it. I would jettison Kirk in a second if that's what we get. But obviously it's about more than just the Kirk Cousins decision. They're not going to hire a GM just because of what he thinks about one player for essentially 1 year. This is about kind of, I'm sure that's what they're gonna. They probably already asked him in the first interview, like, what's your overall kind of goals and how you want to run a team. And it could be very different. We could have a very depending on, and then of course it depends also who that GM. The GM's not going to have the full say, I guess, for who the head coach is. I mean, we're up to a lot. I don't know how many guys we've interviewed for head coaches now. We interviewed Raheem Morris. We interviewed O'Connell, also from the Rams. He's their OC. We interviewed Dan Quinn and Kellen Moore this week. I guess we're going to interview D'Amico Ryans Sunday. Hopefully a victorious D'Amico Ryans. Fuck the pack. Go Niners. But I mean, we may not even be done. Maybe if they depending on whichever GM they bring in, maybe that GM's also got some ideas of some other candidates. I mean, I think the fact that we're down to 2, and they're going to do the second interviews probably either, I don't know if it's over the weekend or early next week. Probably within a week, we're going to have a GM. they're gonna decide because they want to get going then on the head coach hire. Um, you know, I don't know who's been doing the interviews, for the head coaches so far. Probably just, I don't know if it's the owners or maybe they got Brzezinski doing it, or I don't know. I don't know who they got it, but I mean, you don't always have to have the absolute top person in charge doing interviews. I remember doing interviews back in the day for job openings, and I had no say in what was going to happen, but I still did the interviews, and you kind of just jot down what they say. But I'm sure it's a little more complicated when you're hiring, when you're interviewing for a NFL head coach position. But um, but yeah, I would say probably within a week we're going to know the GM, and then I would expect they're going to act pretty quickly then on head coaches. Obviously, more guys are going to become available. We got divisional playoffs this weekend, so more, they're going to be losing coaches in there who are going to become available, and then, week after that, and then you have the gap with the Super Bowl, and basically everybody will be available at that point. Um, of the head coaches who are out there, like, I don't know, man. I don't know if you could say there's a favorite at this point. You hear different reports every single day. Supposedly they're really high on Dan Quinn. I don't know. Like he'd be pretty far down on the list of the guys who have been mentioned. Um, but of course, even that could be factor in, like, Poles comes from Kansas City. If he's the guy, well, they hired a retread coach. I mean, Andy Reid was, I think, a little higher echelon of a retread coach, but maybe that would be an influence there. Maybe they would be interested in still taking a look at Eric Bieniemy. I don't know. We'll see. All I can say is we'll see. Nobody knows what the result of all this is going to be, or how they're going to work out. These are their two guys. They're finalists for the GM. Doesn't guarantee either of them is going to be good. We hope so. I hope so. I hope this next GM and coach are fucking incredible and we win Super Bowls. But we don't know. But yeah, but we're up to that. We got to be up to about 10 head coaching candidates that have been interviewed at this point, and there probably will be a couple more coming. And then once that's when they get the second interview. When they hire the GM, then they'll probably do follow-up interviews with some of the preferred guys from the GM. And it's not all GM deciding it; it's the ownership too, and they'll figure it out. The ownership seems to be pretty open-minded about who they're hiring, because they've had such a wide range of candidates for both at this point. They're obviously very they're casting a wide net. And I got my favorites, and everyone's got their favorites, but we don't know. We just don't know. We might have a little bit of an idea if it's a retread coach, and maybe that's disrespectful to call them all retread coaches, but some of them are retread coaches. It's just a term. It's not meant as a disrespect. But yeah, so we'll probably know pretty soon here now on the GM, and then probably not. I think we'll know within a week on the GM, and I mean, at this point, you got to think we're going to know within maybe 2 weeks who the head coach is going to be, and then things can really get fun.